frazzled, unfocused, emotionally dysregulated. Although we want to be terrific, stable partners, parents, employees, bosses, and friends, it's easy to get stuck in unproductive patterns and erratic behaviors that seem beyond our control. And despite our inborn capacities and environmental influences, we often expect ourselves to be naturally focused, have excellent time management skills, and high emotional intelligence. Yet, in truth, human issues, including neurodiversity, can make it tough or seemingly impossible to handle life's myriad tasks and stressors with ease. In fact, most of us can benefit from support and guidance to learn the skills and strategies that will help us get out of our own way and maximize our capacities. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I'm 41 and was never officially diagnosed, but I think I have a mixture of ADD and high-functioning autism. I'm not on any meds and don't want to be. I've never had a great ability to focus, but it's getting worse. I can get angry and frustrated easily. My partner says I'm getting more reactive and wants some tips. Can you help? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a wonderful guest, Dr. Gretchen Pound, who will be sharing her expertise on neurodiversity, life coaching, and personal optimization. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Pound. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. And before we launch into the topic of the day, the listener's question, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a time where neurodivergent was not a thing. Nobody talked about it. It wasn't in our wheelhouse of diagnoses. And so I struggled, as many neurodiverse people do, especially being a girl, because my symptoms are very different from, a boy's symptoms would be. So there was a lot of stigma placed on me, misunderstandings. And so I took my experiences and have learned a lot from being neurodiverse myself. My kids are neurodiverse, my husband. So I took the opportunity to learn as much as I can about how the brain works, how behaviors manifest, and then how there's an intersection with mental health and mental illness with neurodiversity. So that's kind of where I come from and how I've come to this work in specializing and helping as many people I can that think differently.
Thank you for that really lovely background and coming to the podcast and to your work through a highly personal lens about your own experience. And I'm already formulating questions as you're talking. My first that's just come up is you're talking about gender differences. How does neurodiversity express itself differently depending upon your gender?
Well, first off, the way psychologists and therapists are trained to diagnose ADHD, the criteria is all based on boys. So yes, it manifests differently for girls, and they don't look the same. So girls really, we have seen that they can mask, meaning they can hide their symptoms because they may not have that impulsivity, right? Or they may have impulsivity, it just manifests differently. Like for me, I was a talker in class. And so I was constantly interrupting the teacher, talking to my friends, getting out of my seat. That didn't really get me in trouble enough to get to the principal's office, right? To get me on the radar, right? I was just a talker. That's how girls are. They talk a lot, right? Where, my counterpoint friend who's a boy might be punching somebody and causing, harm to others. And so that would get him sent to the principal's office. And so boys, tend to be maybe a little more aggressive or physical when they're impulsive. And so those behaviors get them on the radar of teachers and principals and so on and so forth. And so they get recognized and oftentimes get diagnosed, where girls just kind of fly under the radar. They learn like, oh, I want to be the good girl, I don't want to be the talker. So they find other ways to mask their behaviors, and they fly under the radar sometimes, until they're adults. Like we're finding out lots of women now are being diagnosed.
Yes, and I'm seeing that in my practice too, where again, when we look at the gender differences, it's normal for a guy almost, we've normalized it to be more physical, to be more impulsive. Well, that's just a boy being a boy. And a girl, a female, you really end up channeling that extra energy or that lack of focus into, maybe in school you see it as extracurricular activities, or as you say, being more talkative, or being the one who really wants to help and please and help others. And so you're channeling it in socially acceptable ways that in the short term and the long term can, for both, no matter your gender, can really have some lasting negative consequences. So thank you for exploring that with us. What are some of the other differences that you see in how gender plays a part in neurodiversity as a whole?
Yeah. The other, like emotionally, I think we could go there because, women who, are neurodivergent oftentimes will have a bigger reaction to emotionally to something. And boys also may have a bigger reaction, but their reaction, like you alluded to, is anger, right? Or outbursts. And so therefore, again, that's more, anger is an acceptable emotion, whether you're a girl or a boy, right? So girls get identified as emotional and misdiagnosed oftentimes with other diagnoses because their emotions do feel intense, or maybe they can't hold their emotions in as well as other people might be able to. So, I feel like that's a big difference between girls and boys in the emotional realm.
And that makes perfect sense. And as you said, anger is a healthy emotion. It's an emotion we all want to embrace. It's how we use our anger, whether we're being regulated with it and careful with it, or whether we're exploding onto other people. And yet, in our culture, males, they tend to be allowed that emotion. They tend to be allowed to be big and angry and aggressive, whereas somebody who identifies as female is like, oh, no, 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 no. If you are showing anger, you are bad. You are not being assertive. You are being aggressive, or you're being a horrible person. You're not good anymore. And so we can see, for those who are, for all of us, but particularly those who are neurodivergent, it's quite a tightrope to be able to hold all of this together and be this ideal human being, when it's like this tea kettle that has all of this emotion inside boiling around, and it wants to find a place. And so it's going to pour out. And for those who are neurodivergent, it can often express itself in pretty unhealthy ways, can't it?
It can. And, neurologically and physically, we know that in some situations, neurodivergent people's amygdala, right, where our emotions are housed, are a little bigger. They're a little bigger. So I always tell my neurodivergent clients, because your brain, your, amygdala may be a little bigger, you're going to have bigger emotions, right? And so that's why the emotions feel so big, and it's harder. And then when you have, difficulty regulating emotions, and you have difficulty with stress tolerance, right? Because those are part of our executive functioning skills. And you have this, this big amygdala. It's like having a race car with like these little bicycle brakes, right? You're just not equipped to handle it.
Absolutely. And when we think about the amygdala, the little almond-shaped pieces in the brain that are the emotional centers, some people call them the fear centers. When we are in a state of stress, or especially in fight flight mode, that prefrontal cortex is not necessarily in control. It is the fear center of the brain that is trying to keep us alive. So we may do things that feel very erratic and look very erratic and nonsensical because we don't yet have the skills. And so this is where we're turning to you today to help us understand not only what's happening physiologically, neurobiologically behind the scenes, but also to understand you can accrue skills. You don't have to be at the mercy of emotional dysregulation. All of the emotions are good. It's just that we want to learn how to make those brakes on the car a
Mhm.
little bigger. We can't change the size of, the amygdala. They're going, each one's going to be there doing its thing, but we can learn strategies to help us improve our ability to put the brakes on sooner, maybe get in some brakes that are bigger. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some, I know we have so much more foundational work to do, but it seems like right now is a great opportunity to look at some of those skills for emotional regulation.
Yeah, so I teach a lot of breath work, following the breath. I'm also trained as a yoga teacher. So I use a lot of yoga breath, body awareness. I study somatic IFS, which is a body centered way of connecting to your body, connecting to your emotions. Because I feel like having this awareness about your body and your mind will allow you to make the decision as to how you want to respond, rather than, like you were saying, where the emotion starts running the show, right? So it's giving you some power back to, feel into what's happening in your body, which then I'll will tell you a lot of times how you're feeling. So if you're feeling a lot of heat in your body, you might start recognizing that heat as like that anger that's like bubbling up, right? Or if you're feeling tightness in your muscles, that is like a cue, like, oh yeah, maybe I'm really stressed or anxious right now. So our body can give us a lot of information. So I'm a big, um, I guess, mind body person in that I help people to make those connections.
Thank you for that lovely background. So we have something in common. I'm also a yoga teacher and um, yoga practitioner student and love incorporating mindfulness, breath work, somatic practices into my work. And for the listeners who are tuning in saying, oh, okay, this is airy fairy, I don't want to pay attention to this, they might not realize because we have been trained as a society to ignore that body mind spirit connection, which is in truth a huge part of who we are. We can't divorce our brains from our bodies and our psyches from our bodies. It's all a part. And the power of the body. In fact, I was working with a client yesterday where we just simply did a pause to do a deep breath in, deep breath out, do some co-regulation. And when we do that and teach that as a normal part, you don't have to be a yoga practitioner. You don't have to meditate. You can just take advantage of your body's natural need to breathe and use that deep inhalation and deep exhalation to down-regulate your nervous system. And when we down-regulate the nervous system, guess what? You can tell us, Dr. Pound, it makes the prefrontal cortex, that rational brain, actually works so much better because we're no longer in that stress state. So can you give, I love that you brought that out. Could you give our listeners an example
Yeah,
of a breathing technique that would is I also love breathing techniques because they're portable. You can do them in the kitchen, at your desk, on an airplane, in the airport, on the bus, in the middle of a shopping mall when the kids are having a temper tantrum. You take them anywhere and they're free.
they're free. Exactly. So the number one breathing technique that I teach is called three-part breath. And it's taking one breath, but you're kind of bringing it in three separate parts. And sometimes I will create a visual with it where I'll have them visualizing the breath coming into their lungs and the first part of the breath, so the first inhalation, they're, seeing the breath coming in, and then the second inhalation is kind of coming into the middle part of their lungs. And then the third inhalation, it's like it's at the top and there's no more air can get in. And then I, will say just hold it for three. So, three isn't the number. You don't have to remember any other number but three. So you're inhaling three, holding it for three. And then the exhale is three. But then I really stress the exhale is really what activates our parasympathetic nervous system. Gets us out of our sympathetic. So I really want that exhale to be slow, controlled, and long. And then I'll say, before you take the next inhale, I want you to count to three again. And I just explain, when we're in a fight flight, we're in our sympathetic, we tend to breathe real shallow from our chest. And so it's so important to slow down and really pay attention to the belly rising and the air, coming, the breath or prana coming from the belly and not from the upper chest. So, just I feel like it's an easy one. Like you said, you can do it anywhere, and people tend to really like it, and it's very effective.
Thank you. And that's so easy to follow. And I'm going to mirror it back so that our listeners can, and I want you to correct me if I get anything wrong. We really focus on the belly. We breathe in, starting feeling it coming from the lungs, then up to the chest, and then through the neck. Hold for three, and then do the reverse, releasing from the neck, releasing from the chest, releasing from the upper abdomen, and then and repeating that for as many times as feels healthy and safe. And listeners, I hope you could feel that beautiful energy, that quietness that happens, whether you're neurodivergent or not. Tools like this, we often underestimate the power of something so simple. It's not a medication, right? But yet it is a natural medication. It's not a pharmaceutical, I should say, but it's a natural medication for the self because we are naturally reducing the stress neurochemicals. We're telling the body, I don't have to react right now. I'm safe. And here's a cool piece that I just love. When I do any breath work with someone, or if I'm working with a couple or a group, you can see the other person or the person that you're working with, they're getting more relaxed. They're taking a deeper breath. You can watch the position change. They're just almost the sense of calm. And when I see parents do it in front of a kid, no matter how old that little kiddo is, that kiddo's noticing and going, oh, so, oh, I can do that. And often the little ones unconsciously co-regulate with the parent. It's just, oh, I see mommy taking a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And you see the little baby belly get big, deep breath in and deep breath out. And so it's a fabulous tool that you're giving us because all too often, let's go back to the listener's question. This person who's getting reactive and the partner's saying, hey, you're getting more reactive. This breathing technique could stop that emotional reactivity in its tracks, could it not?
Yes, absolutely. I do believe it can.
And when we see that happening, so let's say somebody's getting really hot and bothered because somebody's coming in and they're in the middle of a project or things aren't going the way they want. And I think this individual spoke about getting frustrated and angry, right? Frustrated and angry. It is, you can see that that stress response gets interrupted by the breathing. You
Hmm.
can't be stressed and taking deep breaths at the same time. They're just not going to happen. It's not possible. Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And what I find that when people are stressed, they are breathing from their chest. They're not breathing from their belly. And so they're not really getting that good oxygenated blood to their brain. They're feeling like I can't breathe even sometimes. Like, and then that increases their anxiety, and they might even become a panic attack because you know the stress response slows the breathing down, so you can run a really far distance. You can't be, it wants you to be able to outrun whatever it thinks is chasing you, right? So it is a physical response that happens naturally. And sometimes people can't take deep breaths because they might be in a panic. So I always have them ground themselves, meaning feeling their feet on the floor or touch something that's very solid that they can really kind of get in back into their body again.
Thank you for bringing up the piece about panic because it's becoming increasingly common and for people's anxiety to even bypass the anxious state and go straight to panic before they even realized what has happened. And I once heard, and I completely believe in this, that sometimes the fear of having another panic attack can actually trigger another panic attack because it's so awful. It's so difficult to see that it will ever pass, that just being afraid of it can cause one to happen. So let's pause for a minute when you're talking grounding strategies. And again, for people who are neurodivergent and for people who aren't, grounding strategies, as you're saying, feeling your feet on the ground, putting your hands on a wall, taking a ball, a little stress ball, and bouncing it back and forth, even if you're in a place where you can do it. Lying on the ground to feel that cool surface under you. And I'm big on cool surfaces because those do seem to have a very good effect, a great impact on disrupting those panic cycles. So we can see that maybe if you're in your office and you're feeling super stressed, maybe you don't feel like you can lie down on the floor, but you can go to the bathroom. Put your hands on the cool tile wall. Put your forehead on that cool tile wall. Feel, as you're saying, grounding as though the earth, you're back in touch with the earth.
Hmm. That's right.
So, two great strategies. Thank you for that. So, now let's move into when we're talking about the lack of focus. Oh, pause. I do have to say, I remember, and you're a somatic practitioner, so I imagine you have something to say about this. I think we often do, this is not my idea, I've heard it from very advanced practitioners who say that often because we're in a society where we learn to keep our stomach tight because we want that flat figure and we want, whether no matter our gender, we are really trained to hold the stomach in, we're working against our natural way of being where that belly wants to float in and out, in and out. And so the price we pay in some realms is that it does force us into more shallow breathing, all because, so for people who are working on this, they may have to get used to having their hand on their belly to actually feel that it can go in and out. And that's okay. That's normal. That's natural. Just like a baby. Babies aren't worried about how flat their bellies are. And so you watch those little bellies rise and fall. So we can, I think that's another piece of that to keep an eye on, that you may want your hand on your belly as you feel it go up and down, and to encourage that because it is healthy.
Yes, I agree. And sometimes I'll have, one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly,
Mm.
feel your chest rising, your belly rising. And it can be very soothing to the body to just feel that rhythm of the breath, feeling the rhythm coming up and feeling it, kind of going down. And if you're laying down, you can even like put a pillow or something on your belly and you can, watch it rise and watch it fall. So those things can be also very just soothing to the system.
Thank you for that as well. And listeners, you can't see Dr. Pound's hands, but she was making them, unless you're watching on YouTube, she was making them float upward and float downward. And if you can imagine that, that float up and flow down, or actually allow yourself the opportunity, if you can't have that pillow there, to watch that flow. It is just watching the visual of you with your hands. It's that, again, you're interrupting. The brain has something else to focus on. The mind has something else to focus on. You're not focusing on the panic any longer or the anxiety any longer. You're focusing on your natural rhythm. You're focusing on the rise and the fall. And I agree with you, one hand on heart, one hand on belly. That can feel almost as if somebody's giving you a hug. You are reassuring you. One hand heart center, one hand belly. It is one of the most beautiful ways to gently reassure yourself and calm yourself. So, okay, thank you for that. Now let's go to the focus. In today's increasingly online world, where our attention is being pulled in so many directions, and it seems most people believe in, oh, I should be multitasking. And I'm an anti multitasker. I know for me personally, if I'm not fully focused on the thing at hand and I'm trying to do two or three things, I'm not doing any of them well. Yet society pushes us to make dinner, listen to the latest podcast, answer work emails, tend to the kids, and, stock the groceries all at the same time after a long work day. What do you say about focus and how today's world actually makes it tougher for all of us, but particularly neurodivergent people?
Well, there's one thing I wanted to say about that in that for some ADHD folks or people who are neurodivergent, they can focus better having sounds, having like listening to music, or they might be doing homework and listening to music at the same time and maybe even watching a YouTube.
Mhm.
And so that stimulation is enough for their brain to be able to focus. So I want to just say that to parents, to trust your children, because our kids know what helps them. And to us, it may seem like, a horrible idea. But I do know that for some kids, that's how they can do their homework best, right? If they're listening maybe to their music, or they have something, that is on their phone, even though, phones can be a big distraction, right? They can also be helpful. So just wanted to say that. But yes,
So let's pause there. I 100% agree with you. And I don't see it just in kids, I see it in adults. For me, if I'm working, I need pretty much complete quiet for me to focus. But I know many adults who they want music in the background, they want rap, they want opera, they want piano, they want whatever it is, and it works for them. And
yeah,
they can't work in my kind of silence. It's the same for kids. Some do their best in silence or nearly complete silence. Other ones, they can have a circus going on in the background, and it is how they do their best. So we want to pay attention. And as you say, if somebody's using a phone and they're using it for research, well, of course. we're not limited to one set of encyclopedias in a library wall anymore. The kids, and adults use phone for research. So that's important to know, which I see as different from multitasking. I see that as seeing how your individual needs, either for honoring them, so that if you need music, it's there. It's helping you. If you don't need music, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you work better in silence, so that when we come to understand our differences and honor them, then we're really befriending our natural set point rather than fighting it. What do you think of that?
Right. And I think we know naturally what helps us and what works for us, and that we just need to trust, trust that we do know that what helps us to focus, what helps us to, stay on task. And, you know, just allow yourself to use those things to help you. But they can also be a distraction as well. So there's, even with the fidgets, right? We know that, putting something in your hands, a squeeze ball, or, something that you're spinning, right? It can be very soothing. It can help with many, many different sensory, when your sensory system maybe is dysregulated, but it can also be a distraction. It can also distract you away from focusing, right? Or listening, as well as, like I was saying, the phone. The phone, we are so connected to our phones. They make all kinds of sounds. When we get a phone call, when we get a text message, it's beeping, and, it can be very distracting. So it can pull us, going back to multitasking, it can pull us away from, the thing that we were engaged in. And just our minds too, when you're ADHD, it's like you are doing one thing and all of a sudden your brain sees something over here and it's like, oh yeah, I got to do that thing. And oh yeah, I need to do this. And before you know it, you're engaged in multitasking and many tasks. So I always just say, when you notice, your brain is pulling you in different directions, that's when you focus on the thing that you started, or the intention you set for that task.
Thank you again for bringing that up. I call it the butterfly effect, because butterflies go from flower to flower to flower to flower to flower to flower to flower. And I can be very much like that.
Mhm.
And so one of my coping strategies is, if I'm outside and I'm gardening, it's a perfect time to be a butterfly. I can go here, there, wherever. It doesn't really matter in the end. But if I'm doing something in my office, all distractions off, phones off, everything's off, and we have to clear that space. And I get even distracted if there's something on my desk that is out of place. And we don't want to call ourselves abnormal. We just want to say, oh, these are my needs. And if this is, some people work best with a really crazily cluttered desk. Okay, I couldn't do it, but for them, that feels comforting.
Mhm.
And so I'm hearing you say, rather than labeling it as good or bad, notice what works for you and do more of it.
Mhm.
Notice what distracts you. Do less of it. Don't judge it. Just realize, oh, this is calling me off in a direction. So maybe I'll keep my phone. If I keep getting called to my phone, I'll just maybe leave it in the hallway or the bathroom or the bedroom or in my office drawer, so that we are learning to partner with our minds, with our brains, with our nervous system, rather than fighting it.
Yes. I think accepting is such you know, a big term here, because if we can accept how we are, then we can notice without judgment when things are happening, and we then have the power to change it.
I appreciate that. I think acceptance is such a key piece. And before we even get to the acceptance, which is so huge, the self-awareness. We
Mm.
were talking about so much of what you've been describing is, and listeners, this is we're going to put our radar up on this one. When we become aware of our patterns, not judging them, because so many of us grew up being judged by parents or teachers for acting out or not doing this right, not doing that right. And we don't want to do that to ourselves. We want to back up and become aware. When do we lose focus? Do we lose focus more in the morning? Do we lose focus more after lunch? Do we lose focus more in the evening? What makes us lose focus? Are we less focused after we've been on social media? Do we tend to go down a rabbit hole? Just noticing our patterns and again, moving into those, keeping a little log of them so that you can see what's working for you and go, oh, I want more of this in my life. I want more structure. I want less structure. So I think that awareness sounds like it's a really key part of your approach.
Absolutely. I have a saying, change happens within the awareness.
Mm. I like that. I like that because we can't change without the awareness. We can't change. Life might change us, but we can't mindfully change unless we're aware. I remember, this makes me think of this. I was relearning to ride a motorcycle and I wasn't sufficiently aware of my surroundings. So I kept having the same issue. And when I learned to not try to go so fast, but actually slow down so that I became more skilled in the rudimentary pieces, then it was a real game changer. And so I think that that's the part. It's the awareness of, okay, where am I leaning too much or leaning too little or throttling too much? And when it's the awareness.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're so excited to get far ahead, or we're so excited to prove ourselves to other people or prove ourselves to ourselves that we forget, wait a second, this isn't about other people.
Mhm.
This isn't about work performance, mom performance, dad performance, partner performance. This is about me learning me. And sometimes we learn ourselves, and just as we learn ourselves, something in our life or our environment has changed that we're like, oh, well, now I need to adjust again. So that's the interplay that you're talking about, as I hear you saying that we want to be accepting, but we also want to be able to pivot when we need to pivot, that's a big piece of it. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. Definitely.
So what are some tips for helping our listeners? Okay, so they grow the awareness. They want to change. They want to be able to focus more, to be able to accomplish more. That's not this butterfly pattern of buzzing about and accomplishing 50 things halfway done, right? But what are your tips for actually creating the healthy shifts?
Creating a routine can be helpful. So
Okay.
doing things at the same time every day can help create change. Um, Becoming a better planner, chunking things down into smaller, tasks. So instead of, looking at the big picture and getting overwhelmed and feeling like you're not doing anything or you can't do anything, it's almost like you're paralyzed or stuck, people will say. I help people, chunk their tasks down, chunk the bigger picture. Like, let's take the bigger picture and make it into a task that you can do today, and then maybe tomorrow, and then the next day. And so it's taking, really big concepts and bringing them down to workable tasks that they feel confident in or confident that they can complete and do.
That sounds lovely. And I can hear some listeners possibly saying, this sounds really great. This sounds really great, but I can't even focus enough to figure out what I have this macro goal, this goal I want to accomplish, but sitting still long enough to plan these little micro goals that will allow me to get to that macro goal. That's beyond me because by the time I write down the macro goal, my brain's on to something else. What would you say to the person who is that unfocused, which is a common theme?
Hmm. They might chunk their focus time into smaller, pieces. So if they know they can only focus for 10 minutes, then I would have them, focus for 10 minutes and then go do something else. And, I always say it's better to do 10 minutes of something rather than 0 minutes of something or nothing, right? So I help people, chunk their time down. If they only have 5 minutes, then focus for 5 minutes and see what happens. And they can, go do something else, maybe do some doing jumping jacks, moving the body in a way. Or I have a great breathing technique that helps with focus. It's called alternate nostril breathing. That can really be helpful for focus. But we all do have a set focus time, and it's good to know what that is.
And I like how you made it so achievable. If you start with 5 minutes or 10 minutes, sometimes if you don't put the bar too high, you get through to that 5 minutes and you're already at 15 or even 20. And so not making it too big. And I imagine for a lot of our listeners, they also might not like routine. They might balk at the idea of routine. And when I run into clients like that, they're like, no, I want to be free. I don't want routine. I really work with them to understand that routine is freedom. Because when you create that structure, when you get away from the idea that mom or dad is telling me to do this, because often that's why we balk at routine. Somebody, some caregiver, some teacher, some coach, someone put us in a vice. So we equate routine with a lack of independence, a lack of autonomy, where I really see that routine, even though sometimes I fight it, but the more I keep with my routine, the more productive I am because I created it, I set it, and I have the right to change it. And so if we look at that through that framework, routine becomes much more friendly, doesn't it? It doesn't become a jail cell. It doesn't become immobilizing. It gives us the freedom to accomplish in the most optimized way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I feel routine helps us to know what's coming next, right? It helps our system, our body to be, have some predictability, right? That we know we're going to eat, at the same time every day. And then biologically and physiologically, it helps our digestion. It helps our, body secrete the right chemicals it needs to secrete, right? When we have a bedtime routine, our melatonin will start to, just naturally release. So that's why also routines can be super helpful for us, not just neurodivergent people, but for I think all people.
I agree, 100%. So when we take it back to the listener's question, do you have any final thoughts that might help this individual? We've covered a lot on the emotional reactivity. We've covered a lot on the focus. This person does not want medication. And I know you come from a non-pharmacological approach. And listeners, we're not saying medications are bad. We're not saying that. We are saying there are ways that for some people work when you don't want to use medications. So could you talk about that a little bit as we wind up?
Yeah. So just learning about yourself, learning about how, what your strengths are, and continuing to hone in on those strengths, and also to embrace your weaknesses and understand that you're not perfect, nobody's perfect, and be honest with people if you're struggling, in an area and that you are, just having a hard time at work or at school. Be honest, talk about it. That can definitely help the stigma go away, and it will help you to gain that autonomy and acceptance of yourself. And it could help someone else to who maybe is afraid to talk about their struggles. It could help them to open up and feel comfortable, either speaking with you or a boss or a teacher or somebody or maybe a coach or a mental health provider. So I feel like keeping it in is, not healthy. And I'm just encouraging everybody to be a little vulnerable and talk about their struggles, and they can get help and accommodations if they need them.
What a beautiful way to wrap things up, because it is true. When we're vulnerable and we share our challenges, when we normalize them, not only are we modeling for other people that it's good to talk about these things, not to make excuses for our behavior, but to say, hey, this is where I'm struggling. This is where I could use a little support. And then allowing other people to join with us who might say, oh my goodness, I struggle with the same thing. This is what works for me, or my kiddo struggles, or my partner struggles, or, oh yeah. And then we feel better because we don't feel broken. We realize we are imperfect, as we are all imperfect in different ways. It makes us so cool and beautiful and unique. And so once we start having the conversations, then we can see that, oh, maybe I can adapt in this way. Maybe this would work. And others are watching us and saying, oh, I see that person with their, head on the forehead on the bathroom wall. What are they doing? Oh, that's what my tool for when I feel stressed or anxious or overwhelmed. Oh, yeah, maybe would walk into the bathroom then, or not have to go to the bathroom and see a whole line of people standing with their heads against the wall and their arms pressed to the cool surface so that they could take a time out. And wouldn't that be a lovely vision, seeing people use their bodies, use their natural resources to self-soothe, to calm down, and just display their nifty humanness.
I agree.
Well, Dr. Pound, it has been such a delight to share time with you. Where can our listeners find you?
Yes, you can find me on my webpage at Gretchen at healthierlifecoaching.com, or Instagram is Dr. Gretchen. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook.
Wonderful. So there you have it, listeners, Dr. Gretchen Pound. And you'll be able to also find her links in today's show notes. So, Dr. Pound, thanks again for joining us. It's been such a privilege.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you and answering your questions. I hope that your listeners have learned something today and they can feel good about their differences.
Absolutely. I think you've given us all some tools to put in our little toolkits here today, and a lot more than tools. So thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. I so appreciate you. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.